For the longest time, the United States government has had a free hand to do whatever it wants. They became the primary imperialist power in the world at the end of World War II, with eventually what was the collapse of the British Empire. And they've been able to use this to their advantage to do whatever it is that they've wanted to do for this entire time, because they've had an economic and military supremacy. But that unchallengeable hegemonic position, at least in the economic field, is now facing a challenge. The Chinese economy was just recently anointed the largest economy in the world. That's right, China has now surpassed the United States in this regard. It is official. China is now the world's largest economy. The IMF measures both GDP in market exchange terms and in terms of purchasing power. On the purchasing power basis, China is overtaking the US. We've just gone past that crossover in the chart below, according to the IMF. By the end of 2014, China will make up 16.48% of the world's purchasing power adjusted GDP, or 17.63 trillion, and the US will make up just 16.28, or 17.41 trillion. China's economy is now the world's largest. It's not all sour news for the US. It'll be some time until the lines cross over in raw terms, not adjusted for purchasing power. By that measure, China still sits more than 6.5 trillion lower than the US and isn't likely to overtake it for quite some time. In terms of the raw market value of China's currency, it still has a long way to go. For the longest time, the US has had an unchallenged position, a hegemonic role in the world. But as we all know, all empires fall. The British Empire, the previous Chinese Empire, Rome, the Ottomans, the Mongolians, everyone has fallen. And the United States is no different in this regard. The empire is based on the expansion of capital, and capital has its limits. It must always try to stave off a falling rate of profit. It must always expand into new territories to gain new markets and access to cheaper resources. The capital, that is the basis of the United States empire, has finally reached its limit. The US has taken by force the territory or spheres of influence necessary to maintain that rate of profit as best it can. If it could not win it through economic coercion via the IMF structural adjustment programs, military force has been the answer. The problem is that the US is running out of places to expand into. On top of that, the last few places they've attempted to take militarily, Afghanistan and Iraq, are failing. Compound interest, exponentially increasing capital, has reached its limits and can't go any further. These incidents have stalled the expansion of the US empire at a critical point, largely to do with the global 2008 crisis, and the need to expand has gone further. China has seen this, and the Chinese government are obviously not fools. They're looking to manipulate their way into the biggest empire to take over once the US finally falls. And we know it's going to be China. And China has been one of those places where the US has expanded into, particularly as it is for variable capital or human labor, or cheaper labor source. China now is building up its own domestic consumption, producing inside their own country for their own people. They're beginning to lessen their dependence on the United States as a source of capital by having them shift their manufacturing to China. China is well aware of this, and they are beginning to build their own empire themselves because they rightly see the fall of the current US empire. China is in the process of expanding its own capital into other areas, new markets, and spheres of influence. But for now, all those expansions, particularly with regards to Africa, have been peaceful. China is not the only one to see this. Others, most notably Russia, see this as well. This is why trade between the two countries, China and Russia, has increased in the recent months. This is how and why Russia cut a bunch of its trade with the US and its closest allies like Canada. China picks up the slack in trade, and they both grow stronger as a result. This is also the reason why They are in the works to stop using the US dollar for trade, because now they have the power to do so. Just take a look at Vladimir Putin. Look how much his image has changed in the last few months, or even since the whole Ukrainian situation began. He was seen as a dictator, a throwback from the Cold War, and that was the general opinion of him, and that's the way people saw him. But look at him now. He's basically walking around like this ultra-masculine, swaggish type of leader who looks like a badass in everything he does. What he's done is revamp his public image globally. Sure, in the United States, he's still looked at as some kind of psychotic monster. But the fact is, Putin is actually very smart. He's worked all this maneuvering that's taken place in the past year has been, frankly, almost genius work. And now his global image has changed. He's looking like the hero. I mean, anti-imperialists are flocking to the guy as if like he has some kind of power to end U.S. hegemony, like he's finally standing up to the U.S. empire. I mean, that's not exactly true. He's only doing it in Russia's own interests. But the point is, he's changed his image enough to project this. Americans may think that he's a tin-pot dictator or something. But the fact is, the rest of the world has a very different opinion. They're looking at him like he's some kind of badass because he's standing up to the United States, particularly with regards to Ukraine. Putin has outlined plans for closer links with China and a new Eurasian Union. This followed a high-profile deal with Gazprom, the Russian state-backed gas giant, which signed a $400 billion 30-year deal supply to bring gas to China. Despite the details for the deal being scarce, many analysts predict that the oil exports would mean the Chinese yuan being exchanged directly into Russian rubles. Thus, the two countries would bypass the US dollar, the traditional currency used in oil trades, and is the international reserve currency. Now, aside from this move against the US dollar, particularly as it concerns energy trading, think about the fact that China has gotten gold hungry all of a sudden. For a while now, China has been importing gold like crazy. It should be noted that China is the world's largest gold producer, but they're also the world's largest gold importer. Now, do you remember back in 2011, I did a video where WikiLeaks announced that the Chinese government was trading US debt for gold? Do you remember this video? All the way back in 2011, China was converting US debt into gold. This is why. If the US finally fails economically, as they are planning, that US debt is worthless. China holds about more US debt than anyone else does, unless they convert it into something with more universally recognized value, like gold. With this happening, a lot of people tend to resort to some, conspiracy thinking. Like, this is the Federal Reserve secretly trying to take all of our money away. This is the work of the Illuminati, the Jews, or the moderators, or secret socialists, or what have you. They think there's some kind of conspiracy with U.S. money to steal its value and rob people. Which doesn't really make much sense, because even the rich have the same money. That's not what's going on here. This conspiratorial view is based on the premise that there's nothing wrong with capitalism. There are no internal contradictions, that nothing can actually be wrong with it, that it can't have problems that would cause its own demise. The limits of capital are what Russia and China are banking on. U.S. capital will overproduce due to the very nature of capital and credit money. Credit money, or fictitious capital as Marx called it, is what allows an economy to overproduce. How? Credit advances money ahead of the actual creation of value. You cannot overproduce if you don't have a means of overproducing, meaning they produce more value than they are capable of realizing through sales. Eventually, as a part of the industrial cycle, capitalism will overproduce, meaning they will not find a buyer for their entire product. One way to combat this is to expand markets through military force if necessary, which it usually is. This overabundance of credit goes for military conquest as well, to an even greater degree. You can create a ton of fictitious capital, or money capital, for activities that generate no value at all, but they are extremely profitable via interest. State debt is used to fight wars funded through fictitious capital. People lend to the state and get a return through interest paid out of tax revenue, even though no value was created. Quite the opposite, it was destroyed. If no value is created to correspond to this expansion of fictitious capital, then the supply of credit money will collapse and snap back in line with the actual amount of token money and commodity money, usually gold. This is one of the reasons why I think Che Guevara made his famous statement, create 2, 3, many Vietnams. Being a Marxist himself, he understood the limits of capital, and he understood how war doesn't generate value. This he understood, and I think he was witnessing at the time when the Vietnam War was going on, how U.S. gold reserves were depleting, and that his idea to create 2 or 3 Vietnams was an attempt to break down U.S. global capital. Of course, this is about liberating the third world, or liberating the world in general, but from his particular perspective, it was the colonized worlds. Because he knew the U.S. could not afford the war forever, because nobody can. Nobody can sustain themselves on a permanent war economy. The U.S. has attempted to do so, but it doesn't really work, because you're not creating any value. Any value is automatically destroyed, and it's based on fictitious capital. That's the problem. No real value is created to offset all the fictitious capital that's created, and this cannot last forever. It's been successful thus far due to the global hegemonic position that the United States has. That very same position that we now see is in decline. Right now, economically, but sooner or later, that will drag down the military apparatus as well. And what we have is at least China and Russia looking to jockey a position in this new imperialist world that's opening up as a result of the decline by the United States. There may be a sudden incident, a sudden fall, and there will be a power vacuum. And I guarantee you China and Russia, and to a degree Germany, will step in and try to take up as much of that space as possible. They will expand into new markets, and they will begin an expansion of capital that will eventually end up pushing against the limits of each other's expansion and the United States. And then we have the stage set for another World War I type situation. But all of that's fairly far in the future. What we are looking at right now is an impending collapse of U.S. power, economically and then politically, worldwide. And it's in this type of situation where this weakening begins to open up spaces for third world revolutionary movements to make serious moves. The NPA in the Philippines, the Naxals in India, maybe even the FARC in Colombia. This may buy them much needed breathing room in order to capture more territory, to expand their influence and double their strength if necessary. But what we're really seeing is the decline of the United States globally, economically. And Russia and China know this, and they're looking to get their shots in, to get their piece of the global pie once the U.S. grip starts to weaken. Put simply, both the bear and the dragon smell Yankee blood. And for them, this is the time to strike. This is the time to take their shots at the United States to accelerate its fall. And all of this is not some kind of conspiracy or a global plot, but merely the actions of global capital. This is the logic of capital. Each set of imperial interests, the United States, Russia, China, are all in this for themselves, and they're jockeying for position. What this is the bear and the dragon seeing that this is a time to kick the U.S. when it's starting to cough. Thank you for watching. Please comment and rate the video. If you liked it, hit subscribe or check out some of these other great videos. If you wish, share it on social media. And while you're at it, why don't you follow me on Twitter? And if you got time, go on over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.